Affection is meant to feel like warmth, a quiet safety, something that softens the edges of life. But for some people, affection arrives carrying tension. Not comfort, but alertness. Not ease, but a subtle tightening inside the chest. When kindness lingers too long, it begins to feel unfamiliar. When care is offered freely, it raises quiet questions. Why now? What does it cost? What will it demand later? These are not people who lack feeling. Often, they feel deeply. They notice tone, timing, distance, and silence. They read between gestures, searching for what affection might be hiding. Because in their inner world, closeness has rarely been neutral. It has come with conditions, with expectations that appeared later, with disappointment that followed warmth, with love that shifted into control, withdrawal, or loss. So affection no longer registers as a gift. It registers as a signal, a warning that something is forming, something that may eventually hurt. This is not cruelty. It is memory. The psychology of people who turn affection into suspicion is not about mistrust alone. It is about protection shaped by experience, a nervous system that learned too early that tenderness can change without notice. To understand this pattern is not to judge it. It is to listen carefully to how the past still speaks, even in moments meant to feel safe. This chapter explores the immediate emotional response to affection, how care triggers vigilance instead of comfort, and why suspicion often appears before conscious thought. Affection arrives quietly. A thoughtful message, a gentle check-in, an invitation that carries no obvious demand. And yet, before warmth can settle, something inside reacts. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with alertness. The body leans forward internally, as if listening for footsteps behind a closed door. The mind begins scanning for meaning. Was this intentional? Is there an expectation attached? Is this closeness temporary? For people who turn affection into suspicion, the first response is rarely emotional warmth. It is interpretation. They notice patterns quickly. How often someone reaches out. How consistent the kindness is. Whether the tone shifts when attention is not returned at the same pace. This isn't because they are calculating. It is because they have learned that affection is information. In earlier experiences, care may have been inconsistent. Warm one moment, distant the next. Generous until something was wanted in return. Loving until autonomy was threatened. So affection stopped being neutral. It became predictive. Their nervous system learned to ask questions before allowing closeness to land. Questions that once served as survival tools. Questions that prevented surprise. Suspicion, here, is not accusation. It is preparation. Even sincere affection can feel destabilizing when someone has grown used to emotional volatility, because calm closeness feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar sensations are rarely trusted. This is why reassurance often doesn't help. Words like, "I just care," slide past the deeper layer where suspicion lives. That layer speaks the language of history, not logic. The first reaction to affection is shaped long before the present moment. It is the echo of earlier closeness that did not stay safe. This chapter looks at early relational experiences, childhood, attachment figures, and formative emotional lessons that taught affection to feel unreliable. Suspicion rarely appears without a beginning. Often, it forms in environments where emotional signals were inconsistent, where affection was present but unstable, where love could feel generous one day and withdrawn the next. In childhood, safety is learned through repetition, through predictable responses, through knowing what warmth means and when it arrives. But for some, affection was conditional, given when behavior pleased, removed when needs were inconvenient, used as a tool rather than a presence. In these environments, children learn quickly. They learn that affection can shift, that closeness can disappear without explanation, that love may require self-adjustment to survive. Others grow up around emotional enmeshment, where affection comes too intensely, too quickly, where closeness erases boundaries, where care feels intrusive rather than supportive. In both cases, affection stops feeling safe. It becomes something to manage. The child adapts. They observe moods. They anticipate emotional weather. They learn to stay one step ahead of disappointment. Over time, this adaptation becomes internalized. It becomes a lens through which all future affection is filtered. Even when adulthood brings healthier connections, the early template remains active. The body remembers what the mind may try to forget. Suspicion, then, is not distrust of people. It is distrust of patterns learned long ago. Affection feels temporary because it once was. Care feels strategic because it once had motives. The origin of suspicion is not coldness. It is exposure to emotional unpredictability during the years when safety was being defined. This chapter explains the scientific and psychological mechanisms, attachment styles, threat detection, and nervous system conditioning that reinforce suspicion around affection. From a psychological perspective, this pattern often aligns with insecure attachment styles, particularly anxious avoidant or fearful avoidant attachment. In these systems, closeness activates two competing responses at once: a desire for connection and a fear of what connection might cost. The nervous system treats affection as a stimulus that requires evaluation. Is it safe? Is it stable? Is it reversible? Past experiences train the brain to associate closeness with risk. So the amygdala, responsible for threat detection, becomes involved even in gentle moments. This happens below conscious awareness, before reasoning has a chance to intervene. Affection triggers vigilance because the brain prioritizes survival over pleasure. If closeness once led to pain, the system adapts by watching carefully. Cognitive patterns reinforce this response. The mind develops schemas about relationships. People change when you get close. Kindness always precedes expectation. Nothing comes without cost. These beliefs are not chosen. They are conclusions drawn from experience. Over time, suspicion becomes efficient. It reduces emotional shock. It maintains control, but it also prevents full presence, because affection is never simply felt. It is monitored. Psychology does not frame this as dysfunction. It frames it as adaptation that outlived its original context. The system is not broken. It is protecting based on outdated information. This chapter explores the internal tension between craving connection and resisting it, and the emotional exhaustion that results from constant self-protection. Inside, there is conflict. One part longs for closeness, for ease, for someone whose presence does not require analysis. Another part stays alert, ready to retreat at the first sign of emotional shift. This creates exhaustion. Affection becomes a paradox, desired and distrusted at the same time. When someone offers care, warmth rises briefly, then tightens into caution. The heart leans forward, then steps back. People in this pattern often appear composed, independent, self-sufficient, but beneath that surface is constant emotional negotiation. How much to allow? How much to hold back? When to detach preemptively? The resistance is not against the person. It is against vulnerability itself. Because vulnerability once came with consequences, this inner push and pull can create guilt. Why can't closeness just feel good? Why does care feel heavy? The answer is not emotional incapacity. It is emotional memory. Suspicion protects, but it also isolates. It keeps connection shallow enough to remain safe, but shallow enough to feel lonely. This is the cost of survival strategies carried into environments that no longer require them. This chapter focuses on the quiet realization, often subtle, when someone begins to notice the pattern without judgment. Recognition rarely arrives dramatically. It appears in small moments, a pause after receiving kindness, a delayed response to warmth, a sense of tension when nothing is wrong. There is a noticing how affection triggers analysis, how care leads to emotional bracing. This recognition is not blame. It is awareness. For the first time, suspicion is seen as a response, not a personality trait, a pattern, not an identity. This shift matters, because what is recognized can be held differently, with curiosity rather than shame. The realization often carries grief. Grief for how much effort it has taken to stay protected. Grief for how rarely affection was allowed to simply land. But it also carries compassion. Toward the younger self who learned this pattern to survive. Recognition does not erase suspicion. It softens the relationship to it, and that softness is significant. This chapter explores how suspicion and openness can coexist, allowing affection to be approached slowly without forcing change. Healing here is not about removing suspicion. It is about integrating it. Suspicion is acknowledged as a protector, one that stepped in when consistency was absent. Instead of fighting it, space is created around it. Affection is approached gradually, not overridden by logic, not rushed by reassurance. The nervous system learns through experience, not instruction, through repeated moments of care that do not demand payment, through closeness that remains steady. Trust is not decided. It is built slowly, almost unintentionally. Integration means allowing affection to exist without immediate interpretation, letting warmth linger for a moment longer before analyzing it. This is not vulnerability as exposure. It is vulnerability as presence, and it happens quietly. This final chapter offers a reflective closure, reframing affection not as a threat, but as something that can be met with cautious openness. Affection does not have to be trusted immediately. It does not have to be understood fully. It only needs space. For those who turn affection into suspicion, the goal is not to silence doubt. It is to recognize where it comes from, to understand that suspicion was once a form of care, a way of staying intact. Affection, then, becomes an invitation, not a demand, not a test, an invitation that can be accepted slowly, on terms shaped by safety. Because when suspicion is met with understanding rather than resistance, it loosens, and in that loosening, affection begins to feel less like a warning, and more like what it was always meant to be, a quiet presence, nothing hidden, nothing owed,